So now it's Delta Airlines. I don't even know if this is legal. Anyway, let's go take a look. Delta imposes new rules for service dogs after, quote, serious incidents, unquote. Dallas. Soon, Delta Airlines will require additional documentation for passengers taking service animals with them on flights. This comes amid an increase of incidents involving animals, including a dog attack last year. Starting March 1, customers will have to show proof of health or vaccinations for their animals 48 hours in advance. In addition, owners of emotional support animals will need to sign a statement confirming their animal can behave. However, the new requirements don't apply to pets that stay in kennels during the flight. Delta's new rules are aimed at two different types of animals. The first are service animals, which receive specific training to help blind or disabled passengers. Then there are emotional support animals, which require no training at all. Both fly for free and are not required to be caged during the flight. Federal regulators have interpreted a 1986 access to travel law to allow support animals in airplane cabins and in apartment buildings that do not allow pets. But some people use untrained pets in order to get them on a plane for free, especially since it's easy to go online to buy vests or ID card with a service animal insignia. Delta said the idea behind the new regulations is to keep trained service animals and emotional support animals safe from aggressive ones. Overall, the airline says it carries 700 service or support animals every day. But people have tried to fly with everything from turkeys to snakes, spiders, and even gliding possums, which are also known as sugar gliders. In 2016, the company reported an 86% increase in animal incidents that include animals urinating, biting, or showing acts of aggression. Last June, a 70-pound dog flying as a support animal bit another passenger several times in the face on a Delta plane in Atlanta. The victim was hospitalized. The rise in serious incidents involving animals in flight leads us to believe that the lack of regulation in both health and training screening for these animals is creating unsafe conditions across U.S. air travel, said John Lafter, the airline's senior vice president of safety and security. As a leader in safety, we worked with our advisory board on disability to find a solution that supports those customers with a legitimate need for these animals while prioritizing a safe and consistent travel experience. So let's look at what the law says, just because. So ACAA, must carriers permit passengers with a disability to travel with service animals? A, as a carrier, you must permit a service animal to accompany a passenger with a disability. Okay, we'll get to that later. You must not deny transportation. You must not deny transportation to a service animal on the basis that its carriage may offend or annoy carrier personnel or persons traveling on the aircraft. 2, on a flight segment scheduled to take 8 hours or more, you may, as a condition of permitting a service animal to travel in the cabin, require the passenger using the service animal to provide documentation that the animal will not need to relieve itself on the flight, or that the animal can relieve itself in a way that does not create a health or sanitation issue on the flight. B, you must permit the service animal to accompany the passenger with a disability at any seat in which the passenger sits, unless the animal obstructs an aisle or other area that must remain unobstructed to facilitate an emergency evacuation. C, if a service animal cannot be accommodated at the seat location of the passenger with a disability who is using the animal, you must offer the passenger the opportunity to move with the animal to another seat location if present on the aircraft, where the animal can be accommodated. D. As evidence that an animal is a service animal, you must accept identification cards, other written documentation, presence of harnesses, tags, or the credible verbal assurances of a qualified individual with a disability using the animal. E. If a passenger seeks to travel with an animal that is used as an emotional support or psychiatric service animal, you are not required to accept the animal for transportation in the cabin unless the passenger provides you current documentation, i.e., no older than 1 year from the date of the passenger's scheduled initial flight, on the letterhead of a licensed mental health professional, including a medical doctor specifically treating the passenger's mental or emotional disability, e.g., psychiatrist, psychologist, licensed clinical social worker, stating the following. 1. The passenger has a mental or emotional disability recognized in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 4th edition. The passenger needs the emotional support or psychiatric service animal as an accommodation for air travel and or for activity at the passenger's destination. The individual providing the assessment is a licensed mental health professional, and the passenger is under his or her professional care, and the date and type of the mental health professional's license and the state or other jurisdiction in which it was issued. F. You are never required to accommodate certain unusual service animals, e.g., snakes, other reptiles, ferrets, rodents, and spiders, as service animals in the cabin. With respect to all other animals, including unusual or exotic animals that are presented as service animals, e.g., miniature horses, pigs, monkeys, as a carrier, you must determine whether any factors preclude their traveling in the cabin as service animals, e.g., whether the animal is too large or heavy to be accommodated in the cabin, whether the animal would pose a direct threat to the health and safety of others, whether it would cause a significant disruption of cabin service, whether it would be prohibited from entering a foreign country that is the flight's destination. If no such factors preclude the animal from traveling in the cabin, you must permit it to do so. However, as a foreign carrier, you are not required to carry service animals other than dogs. Whenever you decide not to accept an animal as a service animal, you must explain the reason for your decision to the passenger and document it in writing. A copy of the explanation must be provided to the passenger either at the airport or within 10 calendar days of the incident. You must promptly take all steps necessary to comply with foreign regulations, e.g., animal health regulations, needed to permit the legal transportation of a passenger service animal from the U.S. into a foreign airport. Guidance concerning the carriage of service animals generally is found in the preamble to this rule. Guidance on the steps necessary to legally transport service animals on flights from the U.S. into the United Kingdom is found, blah, 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 blah. So I'm not going to go through these guidance documents in full, but I will discuss one little paragraph here. Here it is. What do I do if I believe that the carriage of the animal in the cabin of the aircraft would inconvenience non-disabled passengers? Part 382 requires airlines to permit qualified individuals with a disability to be accompanied by their service animals in the cabin as long as the animals do not, 1, pose a direct threat to the health or safety of others, and this is important. They're examples. E.g., animal displays threatening behaviors by growling, snarling, lunging at, or attempting to bite other persons on the aircraft. So when they talk about a direct threat to the health and safety of others, they're talking about the behavior of the animal, not the shot record or the health record. Or 2, causes a significant disruption in cabin service, i.e. a fundamental alteration to passenger service. Offense or inconvenience to other passengers, and they give examples, is not sufficient grounds to deny a service animal carriage in the cabin. However, carriers should try to accommodate the wishes of other passengers in this situation, such as by relocating them to a different part of the aircraft. What do I do if a passenger claims that he or she is allergic to someone else's service animals? And it goes on. I'll put this in the description, links to this. I don't want to go through it all because it's huge and it's long. But basically, when they talk about a health and safety hazard, they're talking about the actual behavior of the dog, not whether it has shots. Nowhere in the guidance or the rules permits the airline to require shots. That might be an issue. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, last but not least is the actual form. I went to Delta Airlines and I looked up the actual form. It's already on there. So let's take a look at the form. Oh, by the way, they're the same except for the mental health documentation required for psych and emotional support animals. They are exactly the same except for that one part, just so you know. Emotional support psychiatric service animal request. When flying on Delta, we welcome travelers with service or emotional support animals in the aircraft cabin. We require customers traveling with a psychiatric service / emotional support animal to obtain documentation from their medical or mental health professional. These forms must be submitted at least 48 hours before your flight, meeting the following guidelines. This form is valid for 1 year from the date the licensed medical or mental health professional treating the Delta customer has signed the form. Other documentation may be required for travel, entering or exiting certain domestic or international locations. Service animals must be leashed or otherwise restrained by carrier or tether and remained under the control of their owner for the duration of the flight. That's also not in the rules. It's a good idea, but it's not in the guidance or the rules. Animals must not obstruct an aisle or other area that must remain unobstructed to facilitate an emergency evacuation. That's on target. Animals must remain in the customer's personal seat foot space at all times during flight. Not exactly. If an animal carrier will be used, it must meet the approved guidelines and fit under the aircraft seat, as if there is any room under the aircraft seat. So here's the instructions. Go down. Required documents. Veterinary health form. 2. Mental health professional form. 3. Confirmation of animal training. So here we're looking at the veterinary health form. Please fill out and return the following through a service request at delta.com. This form must be completed by a veterinary professional and submitted no less than 48 hours before your first flight on a customer's itinerary. You may submit a copy of vaccination records in lieu of this form, as long as all of the below information is included. Vaccination dates and veterinary office information. And it says to keep the original forms in your possession while traveling. Request is not confirmed until your animal can be visually verified at airport check-in counter. Then we have our medical mental health professional form, certifying that you need the dog, you have a mental health disability. Confirmation of animal training. Please fill out and return the following, blah, blah, blah. All animals on board an aircraft must show evidence that they are trained to behave in public. As a confirmation of training, please complete the form. Your full name. I confirm that this animal has been trained to behave in a public setting and takes my direction upon command. I understand that if my service animal acts inappropriately, that it will be considered not acceptable for air travel and will be denied boarding or will be removed from the aircraft. So here we go. And like I said, the one for regular service dogs is the same except for this mental health professional form. So I wrote a letter to Delta requesting information and making complaint, and I'll read you what I sent them. You are taking on new policies in regards to service animals and emotional support animals. One of those is a health certificate from a vet or shot records. I am a dog professional in addition to being disabled, and I give my own vaccinations at home with the exception of rabies, which by law has to be done by a veterinarian at a certain time, and I receive a certificate for it at that time. I commonly keep the label off the vaccination bottle in my records for all other vaccinations I do at home. Will this suffice along with my veterinarian's information for my trained service dog? Also, this may not even be legal to put extra requirements such as these on a service dog handler. And I wish to make it clear that as a handler of a psychiatric service dog that is task trained as well as generally trained as well or better than any agency provided dog, that I am becoming increasingly irritated with my trained dog being lumped in with those out of control, mangy, emotional support animals. Break. Disclaimer. When I say the ill-trained, mangy, emotional support animals, I am speaking of those specifically. Not all emotional support animals. Just the ones that are ill-kept and out of control and untrained. I just had to say. In addition, what if a dog is not yet old enough to receive rabies yet? I have transported dogs too young to have received the rabies for short distances by air before, and I cause them to behave almost as well as a fully trained dog, sitting on the floor at my feet and being quiet and still. In parentheses, slept almost the whole trip, as a matter of fact. In fact, my current service dog got his first qualification in obedience competition only a month after he received his first rabies vaccine, in parentheses, and I have certification and videos to prove it. That kind of good behavior and training didn't just happen in that 1 month. He'd been performing in that fashion for several months, and we were just waiting for him to be old enough to compete and a show to be nearby for us to go to. Since rabies vaccines are very hard on a dog's system, I am not going to give the rabies vaccine so much as 1 second before I absolutely have to. Young dogs can also be ACEs, and they can be extremely well behaved. So are you going to refuse to transport someone's ACE because they are not yet old enough to have the vaccine required? I get why you're trying to do what you're trying to do, but I'm highly irritated that I am being drawn into the same net when myself and my dogs don't remotely compare to those other dogs in regards to level of health care, cleanliness, and training. Waiting to hear back from you. Okay, well, here are my thoughts on this issue and my concerns. First, I'd like to grouse, complain, carry on, whine, holler about my trained psychiatric service dog, which took hundreds and hundreds of hours of training, being lumped in with ACEs, 3/4 of which don't have a lick of training on them. They're lucky to have anything done with them other than being yanked off the bed and called an ASA. Then I brought up the concern. I vaccinate at home. I do all my preventative health care at home. I do the vaccinations, I do the worming, heartworm, flea prevention. I do all of that at home. I know what I'm doing. I know how to monitor the vaccines. They have to be kept a certain temperature, they're no good. So I order them from the supplier and have them sent to me. And I monitor, that they've maintained the proper temperature over the transport. I know all about that. I know how to give the vaccines. It's not rocket science. So, save rabies, which by law, a veterinarian has to do rabies. I do go to clinics to have that done. Vets are very costly. And rather than spend my money on preventative care that I am well able to do at home, I save that money for if my dogs actually are sick or hurt and actually need a doctor. That's what I spend my money on. So, for the preventative stuff, I do it at home. And I brought up, what if they're too young for a vaccine? Let's take Cole, my current service dog, as an example. When his litter was 8 weeks old, it was time to go test and select the one I was going to take and train for service work. I flew across the state, an hour air flight. I flew over there to do the testing and the selection. And then I brought him back on the air flight with me under ACA status. I can get ACA status because I have a mental health disability. I was able to do that. So I got the ACA paperwork and I transported him back home in the cabin on the air flight with me back home. There was not a problem. He was hardly any more of a problem than a fully trained service dog. I held him in my lap and he was quiet until we got up in the air. And then I put him on the floor at my feet on one of those, I guess they call them pee pads. They're plastic underneath with kind of cloth on top. I put one of those on the floor just in case. And I had several of them so that if he should, have an accident, I didn't think he would because he'd gone before we left. And no food and water after he went. Just in the case of an accident, I could whisk it up, roll it up in on itself, and I had plastic baggies I could shove it in. And, I've got another one I could lay down. That's how I intended to deal with it. After we were up in the air, I put him on the floor. He was leashed. He was in a little harness and he was leashed. For a second or two, he thought he was going to, tootle off and go wander off. I appropriately and gently corrected him. No, we're not going to do that. That's not allowed right now. You've got to stay on your spot. He curled up in a ball and he went to sleep for the whole flight home. When we were getting ready to land, I pulled him up into my lap again because, when you hit ground, it's a jar and he was not going to be expecting that. I didn't want him to become too frightened. So I pulled him up into my lap for the landing, and then we left the plane and, we exited the airport. There was no problem whatsoever. If the dog is relatively untrained, a lot can be done with the proper handling. If the dog has not yet learned to control itself, intelligent, experienced handling can cover for that, can take care of that to where they're not a problem. So he traveled. He was not even old enough by law for the rabies vaccine. He had his distemper. He'd had his first shot before, I selected him, but he was not months before he was going to be old enough for his rabies. So that's an issue. If the person can make it happen, proper behavior and all of that, I don't see why they should be excluded. As far as the pad on the floor on long air flights, airlines allow They want you to explain, how you're going to relieve your service dog on a very long air flight. They do allow for a way to um, relieve your dog as long as it doesn't create a problem, a mess, that kind of thing. So I don't think the pad would have been improper, because that might have been a long flight for a dog that age. But I provided for a way that if something should occur, it could be instantly gone, wrapped up, put away in my bag, done. So that would have been no problem. I want to move on to the fact that nowhere in the law does it allow for them to require vaccinations. And I haven't even hit the proof of training yet. We're just dealing with the vaccinations, the veterinary stuff at this point. Nowhere in the law does it allow them to require shots or veterinary documentation. Not that they shouldn't have shots. They should have age appropriate shots. I'm not advocating not to vaccinate. That's not what I'm advocating for. I'm just not advocating for them requiring to see it. For them to be in charge of what vaccinations are or not done. That's up to the vet and the owner. Airlines should not be in the middle of that. Nowhere in the law does it allow for this. When they talk about health and safety hazards in the law, they're talking about the actual behavior of the dog itself, clearly. So I don't even know that they can get away with doing this. They are not to deny service dogs, and under ACAA rules, emotional support animals and service dogs are considered both service dogs for whatever stupid reason. They shouldn't require this of service dogs, I don't think, under the law. The law would have to be changed. Distemper is not zoonotic. Zoonotic is a disease that animals get that people can get from the animals. Distemper is not zoonotic. It would have to involve contact between two susceptible species, a bite or a nip or, contact with body fluid for that to pass. And it's only a danger to susceptible animals. Distemper can be given at 8 weeks old. Some dogs get it at 6 weeks old. So it's not a huge thing, but it's not zoonotic. When they talk about wanting to protect other dogs, I could see the distemper thing, being an issue because it could pass to another dog, but it's not zoonotic to other people. Rabies is the concern. Rabies is definitely the concern, but they have to be a certain age, and that age can vary in different states. They have to be a certain age to have had the rabies vaccine. So are they going to bar all dogs, until that age? Some places, some localities, it's 3 months. Other localities, it's 4 months. Other localities, it might be as late as 6 months. At 6 months, many, not all, but many of my service dogs in training are behaving up to the minimum standard that a school might have. Sit, stay, down, come, behave properly in public. They'd be nearly indistinguishable from a fully trained service dog, except that their physical features, you could tell that they're young dogs. They're not yet adults. So how's that going to work? Again, the person should be in charge of the rabies, not an airline. But on the plus side, with the rabies vaccine, I don't believe, I think probably most states, it's not legal for anybody but a veterinarian to give it, and you get a certificate or documentation that you've had the vaccine, and it's something you need to do anyway. So that's something generally service dog users would have on hand. If their dog is old enough, they're going to have a certificate or some proof the dog had rabies. And then there's the extra cost for a vet So let me put this to you. I'm a person who does all the preventative at home. And, that means a distemper gets given at home. Say that I need to go on an air flight, and say it's an emergency. Say one of my family members in another state suddenly got in an accident or became ill and they're dying. And I need to get there, quick, 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 quick. Well, my dogs haven't been sick. I haven't been to the vet in a year because they haven't been sick. They've had their vaccines. I gave their vaccines at home. And say that finances have been really bad for like a month or two. Horrible. In fact, one of my other family members is going to pay for the flight so that I can say goodbye to this family member before they die. What am I going to do? Under these rules, I would have to figure out some way to pay for taking them to the vet, because the vet, to sign stuff like this, the vet has got to have seen the animal within like 6 months, I think, for you to just call them up and say, hey, I've got this. Can you do this for me? They have to have been seen within like 6 months. So if my dogs haven't been seen for a year, whatever dog, one dog or two dogs, usually, for me, it's one. I'd have to figure out a way to afford to take them to the vet, so the vet could listen to their heart, look in their eyes, feel their body, and say, okay, they're healthy. Show the vet, what I've done at home. And if the vet will accept that and sign off on that, have them fill out the paperwork. What if the vet does not want to accept the home vaccination as valid because they didn't do it? My daughter's vet has no problem with it. My current vet doesn't want to accept home vaccinations, but they don't have a legal say, so it's their personal problem. But if I have to go on an air flight, so now I have to over-vaccinate my dog at a further expense, at the vet, while I'm traumatized, trying to get to my family member, and it's short notice, it's an emergency. I've got to try to do all this to get my service dog right to travel with me. That's out of control. That is flipping out of control. Then, on the training side, I personally have no problem. The form says, your dog's trained to behave in public. Okay, sign off on it, whatever. Okay, fine. Now, my dogs are trained, but what's to stop somebody from lying on the form? So they're carrying their dog to the ticket counter, and their dog isn't obviously misbehaving at that moment. So they clear them through. They've lied that their dog is trained. So they get them into the gate area or on the plane. They put them down. They poop. They pee everywhere. They go after the neighboring person next door, try to bite them, whatever. What is stopping somebody from just lying? They already lie with their mouths now. So you think a signature, signing it, okay, it'll deter a few. But, people are just going to lie. They lie with their mouths. They'll just lie in writing. I mean, they don't care. So how is that going to help? How is that going to protect other dogs? And I don't think this is about protecting the other dogs. I think because of that biting incident, this is about protecting people. Yes, we should protect people. This is about protecting people. And in that case, distemper isn't even a thing. If you have your vaccinations for distemper and the other things, if you have your vaccinations, your dog isn't going to be at risk if somebody else's dog does not. As service dogs, they should, not be over vaccinated, but they should be vaccinated for all kinds of stuff, because they go everywhere, they do everything. They're exposed to people who might carry germs on their shoes or on their hands. It's just good sense that your dog is vaccinated. If your dog is vaccinated, you know, the guy next to you with a dog with distemper is not going to be able to get your dog sick. You know, it's just not a happening thing. What the real deal is about passenger safety from dogs that are aggressive. I'm all for that. And that's where rabies is a concern. You know, maybe I wouldn't be so upset if it was just rabies, because I think, I'm not positive, don't quote me on this, but I do believe every state in the United States has a rabies vaccination requirement. You know, I I I wouldn't be so upset if it's just rabies. It's just something you regularly do anyway. And it has to be done by a vet. I do believe most of the states in the United States, the rabies has to be given by a vet. So, but if it doesn't, you know, they could document it some other way. I'm for the person documenting, you know, the label of the bottle or whatever. I'm for them documenting it some other way. But the rabies is the real concern, because we had the bite incident, you know, and it could happen again. So I don't see how this is going to help. This is just going to burden legitimate service dog users just more, because some people can't be appropriate and play nice and you know, do the right thing. Disabled people are going to be nailed more. And it just, wow. So I'm going to wait for them to get back to me on what I asked them. I may look into filing a complaint. Off the top of my head, I don't know where you'd go with ACAA complaints. I may look into that and file a complaint. This is just not well thought out. It just isn't. So, I guess we'll see where this goes and how it goes. Anyway, till the next video. Bye.